21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
Well, first, Martin, thank you so much for allowing me to appear on your podcast. It's a highly respected one, and hopefully I could share some stories and some observations from my experience. As you can see, I've got a lot of gray hair. So hopefully some of that could be passed along and be beneficial for some or all, hopefully all of your listeners. My name is Cameron Bishop. Today, I am an investment banker with a firm based out of Denver, and I'm based out of Kansas City, Missouri, right in the heart of the United States. And our firm, Raincatcher, is what's referred to as a lower middle market investment bank. There's a very underserved section of company sizes today. And those size ranges are generally a minimum of $1 million in EBITDA profits up to around 10 million. The big investment bankers, those companies are too small for them. Many of the Main Street business brokers, those companies are too complex, particularly from a financial standpoint, based for their experiences. They're more focused on what are referred to as Main Street type businesses. So we have brought big investment bank tactics and techniques and experiences down to the lower middle market level. So it's a very vibrant market today. The statistics are, I believe, something like 10,000 baby boomers turn age 65 every day. So many of them are family-owned business owners or privately owned businesses. So those business owners are aging out. The metrics are that the majority of those owners who have children or other family members, specifically children, their children aren't interested in moving into the family business. And because a business is generally the largest source of potential wealth and in particular generational wealth for these business owners, if their children don't want to inherit it, then they're left with the opportunity or the option, they're going to need to sell the company. And that's where my mission is here, appearing on programs like yours, Martin, is to help share some of the experiences that I've witnessed and managed through with a lot of these business owners and to try to help them properly establish what they need to do in their business to make it hopefully ultimately sellable and sellable at the highest valuation rate, and to avoid one of the huge challenges, because the metrics are, I think I saw an article in Forbes magazine several years ago, and one of the West Coast University's small business program, the statistic is that somewhere around 70 to 80% of business owners who try to sell their company never sell their company. And again, there are a lot of reasons why. So that's where I am today, and I'll kind of take you on an unusual story of how I got here and why this is kind of a passion mission for me, as well as the fact that I just love helping business owners when they're ready to sell, to give them guidance and hopefully, get them the generational wealth that they hope to get. So I'm a born and raised Midwest United States guy. Started working when I was age 16. I ended up going to the University of Missouri School of Journalism, which is arguably the best or one of the best in the country, and got my degree. And I started out my career in a small technical magazine publishing company. By small, I mean, I think we had 90 employees. They did about 7 million. And I wrote ad copy. But over time, I kind of moved up the management chain there. And our company then was owned by a massive international conglomerate called IT&T. And about 7 or 8 years after I joined, IT&T sold off all of their non-strategic assets, and our company was acquired by the Macmillan Book publishing company out of New York. There was a Fortune 100 company, and they took a look at us. They said, "Hey, we really like this technical magazine business. We want you to grow it. We want you to go out and buy more companies." They didn't tell us how to do that. They just said, we've got the legal team to support you, we've got the financial structure, etc. Go buy companies. And it was about the equivalent of taking a 6-month-old baby and taking him or her and dropping her in the swimming pool and say, swim. So I had both the bad fortune and good fortune to do the first deal we did after they gave us the mandate to buy companies. I bought a small business. By small, by some standards, it could be big, but it was about $1 million transaction. And I got a PhD in acquisitions on that deal with the mistakes I made. So typically, I think we all learn more from the mistakes we make than from the successes we have. And I learned that one the hard way. And that's a high pressure business. You're spending somebody else's money, so you feel extreme responsibility. So over time, and by the way, the key mistakes I made weren't in analyzing the financials. It was in analyzing the people involved with the business. And that's where we made mistakes in assessing how they needed to be integrated into our company and what they needed to be incentivized and how dependent the business was on them. And I'll talk more about that later because that's a key area for mistakes in business owners still to this day, if they want their company to be sellable. So over the course of time, I was there for 23 years, moved up the food chain, ended up as the CEO of that business. A company we had grown from 7 million in revenue to 400 million in revenue. We went from one office location to 23 offices around the US, 5 foreign countries, a little over 2,000 employees, and we were a money machine. We were throwing off about 100 million in adjusted EBITDA profits every year. There was a change in the senior management of the parent company, and I chose to take a wild step and at that time go out on my own. So that's where my true entrepreneurial side came out. So I spent about 6 months writing a business plan. And then I spent almost another year and a half with my business plan, traveling around the United States, and I pitched my concept to about 50 different private equity firms. And it's interesting because the former management of my previous company, the chairman was a very difficult guy to get along with. And so some of my personal priorities changed, and I wanted to work in an environment where you were working with really positive people that wanted to collaborate and were supportive, as opposed to toxic. And the first page of my business plan, and this kind of predates PowerPoint, it's good old-fashioned, old school, put together a book with charts and graphs. And the first page of my presentation said, "I believe, ... that you can work really hard, make a lot of money, and still have fun." And I wanted a partner to work with. I just didn't want somebody that was going to back me with money. And I could tell almost immediately, based on the reactions of the people that I met with in person, whether or not they were going to be the right kind of a partner for me. Most weren't. Fortunately, finally, after several failed starts, because buying companies is damn hard to do and deals die all the time. And I'll talk a little more about that later. So I had 3 deals die, and you just lose a ton of time when that happens. 2, 3, 4 months, depending on where you are in the process. And I ended up partnering with JP Morgan Chase Bank's private equity division. At that time, it was about a $6 billion fund. And we started that business from my kitchen table. I brought on a CFO who was experienced in that area. And it took us another year to get our first deal done. But we ultimately grew that business from 0 revenue in my kitchen to roughly 120 million. We had 7 office locations, and we had about 500 employees. Unfortunately, that business and again, these are things you learn the hard way, was heavily leveraged, which was a decision of the private equity firms. And we got caught in the credit crunch and the economic downturn of 2007, 9, 10, whatever you want to call it, which forced the company to begin to ultimately liquidate. So again, a lot of lessons there, but over the course of that time, I acquired about 50 companies and spent a little over $500 million. In the process, when working for private equity, it's called leveraged roll-ups. So there's a lot of debt leveraged on the business, and they put in just about as much equity as they need in order to get a return on their investment when the whole company is sold off. And one of the things I saw, and I've probably looked at deal books on over 500 companies in my career, is that many of these business owners are penny wise and pound foolish. They try to go it alone rather than hire professional, experienced representation in the form of a high-end business broker or an investment banker. And they end up, frankly, leaving a lot of money on the table. And I saw that frequently. And wasn't my job. I was the buyer to point out to them if they would do these things, that I'd be paying them more money. But that became one of my goals over time, was to help educate and protect business owners sometimes from themselves in that process. So once I left the roll-up company I started, I spent about a year helping Hallmark Cards here in Kansas City do a very ugly, or not ugly, but very complex turnaround on a consumer high-end magazine that they'd established in New York. So I spent about a year helping them work out on that deal. And then I partnered with another private equity firm and bought back part of my prior company, where I spent the next 5 years. But I've always had this mission around helping educate these business owners. From there, I didn't want to run a private equity backed company anymore, so I became a partner in a boutique consulting firm and specialized in exit and transition planning for private business owners. So I did that for about 5 years, ended up selling some of those companies for my clients, which I discovered I really liked doing. And then I got called away to do a very, very difficult turnaround on a $60 million nonprofit business focusing on the training industry globally. And I did that under a contract for 3 years, which ended during COVID. And I became very bored very easy. I'm fortunate. I don't have to work if I don't want to, but I'm one of those odd folks who just likes to work. And so I said, well, what do I want to do? I like buying and selling companies. I like helping business owners. So I found the firm I'm with now as a partner and a managing director, Raincatcher, firm that's been around for 11 years and is headquartered in Denver. Great group of people, highly intelligent, and we were a virtual company before that was a thing. So we've got about 16 team members, and I'm going to guess 10 or 12 different states around the country. So we help business owners when they decide it's time to sell, to represent them to sell their companies. So that's what I do today. But in the course of that, we get contacted by dozens and dozens of business owners who have often profound challenges with their business that make them unsellable. And that's why I decided to embark on this mission to appear on podcasts. And I thank you again for having me on, Martin, because you have such a great audience. Hopefully, I can share this message and it will help at least one business owners, if not more. And they also know, hopefully from my conversation here today, that I can be a resource for them. I know a lot of your listeners are entrepreneurs or interested in entrepreneurialism, so I'll share. Besides the publishing company I started, and I've shared that story, I started a small business, a passion business for me in the health and fitness testing industry. So I bootstrapped that business. At the same time, I was also working as a management consultant. And a couple of things I've learned about being an entrepreneur that many don't realize, because some think that being an entrepreneur is glamorous, and hey, it certainly can be. Or they say, I'm going to start my own company because I don't want to have a boss. Well, there's some fundamental flaws in that thinking. Again, I've learned those the hard way. So first of all, you do have a boss, and your boss is now your customer. And he or she can be far more demanding than that boss you work for in a corporate setting. But I forget the boxer who said this, but everybody thinks they've got a plan until they get punched in the nose. And every entrepreneurial plan I've ever seen was ultimately heavily flawed, no matter how much research and how much planning had been done. And I have a good friend here in Kansas City who started a company inside an incubator for startups at a major, well, it was the tax company H&R Block. They had a incubator to help startups. And this guy started a company and it just started to explode. And they wanted to really fast track it from there. And he was much more conservative. And his response to them, I think to this day, was brilliant. He said, hey, 50% of my business plan is right, and 50% of it is wrong. I just don't know right now which half is which half. So I'm still trying to figure that out. So the best laid plans, often things don't work out the way you hope they will, or in the manner they will. So you have to be adaptable and highly resilient, have a high energy level, not be discouraged easily, because there's could be a lot of downtime. So my goal was that in managing companies as well, never to let the highs get too high or let the lows get too low. You're going to go through some cycles in that process. And it's same holds true for most business owners, even if they're a second or third generation family business in the process. Again, for my mission that I truly hope will help business owners. Uh, so there are some fundamental factors that we see in many, or actually, sadly, the majority of the companies who come to us about selling. There are mistakes that can be quite profound. So the top mistake we see in business owners, and again, these are companies that may be doing 5 million, 10 million, 50 million, some even slightly more than that in revenue. So these aren't, small companies necessarily under $1 million. Many are well established, many are successful. But the biggest problem we see is oftentimes either no accounting, terrible accounting, or very inaccurate accounting. And if they don't have good financial reporting in the form of uh, income statements, profit and loss statements, balance sheets, sometimes depending on the kind of business, cash flow statements, no one will buy those businesses, period. And if they don't have a history of solid, accurate financials, because almost every buyer wants to see a minimum of 3 years of financials. And sometimes on some kinds of businesses, they may want to see 4 and 5 years of financials. And if business owners don't have those in place, then they're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of money for an outside accounting firm to run the forensics and go back and rebuild and restate all the financials. And many don't understand that there are two ways to keep their financials. One is on a cash basis, and the other, and this is the more preferred way, is on an accrual-based GAAP accounting set of standards and rules, which is a pretty standard way for CPAs and CFOs to properly manage their books. So those kill a ton of deals because they aren't qualified. But part of the more interesting challenge there is When a business owner calls us and says, "Hey, I want to sell my company," because it's a highly personal decision, first question we ask them is, "Okay, why?" There are many, many reasons for that, and I'll get into those later. But we've kind of covered that, and they're selling for reasonable reasons, oftentimes because of health issues or retirement or divorce or split up with a business partner, etc. We talk about the financials, and it's quite astounding how many business owners don't know how much revenue they make, and more so, they have no idea how profitable their business is. They don't know the difference between net income, net operating income, EBITDA profits. Uh, they don't know these things, and have had them set. So one kind of tragic story: I had a husband-wife business owner ran a brilliant company, very high tech, in the automotive test aftermarket testing business. The husband was an engineer. He owned 5 patents and trademarks. And we had the call. He didn't want to run the company more. He wanted to focus on design and engineering. Makes a lot of sense. So I said, okay, give me an idea of the scale of your business. What's your revenue? What's your profit? And his wife, who managed the book, said, well, we did about $6 million in revenue last year, and we did about 1.4 million in EBITDA profit. I said, great. We'll sign a non-disclosure agreement. We want you to send us all your financial information. One of my partners that I work with is a licensed CPA, and he spent 15 years in the audit practice with the top 4 accounting firm, KPMG. So he knows this stuff inside and out. He goes through them with a fine-tooth comb. And because this company had a lot of what's referred to as work in progress, it took about 6 months to build one of their pieces of test equipment. And they had a lot of raw materials that required, circuit boards and metal and etc. So they had a lot of materials in inventory and a lot of equipment in work in progress inventory. And they took an advance payment. These pieces of equipment were $50,000 to $100,000. So they essentially used the advance payments as cash flow. So it sort of masked some of the cash challenges in the business. But when we went through and did our audit work on the business, sadly, not only was the company not making 1.4 million, but the company was actually just marginally break even. Once it was measured by true accounting practices and principles on a GAAP accounting basis. So obviously, the husband and wife were devastated because their company at that time, they could have sold the company based on the value of the patents, but it would have been materially less than what the company would have been worth if they had truly been making 1.4 million in profit. So that's just one simple example of the complexity that bad or poor or inaccurate accounting can create. And in their case, they'd actually reported more profit than they actually made, and they paid on it for tax purposes in previous years. So they even cost themselves more money in that regard. So I urge business owners to, I have an expression: know what you know how to do well and do it. Know what you don't know how to do well and find an expert to do it for you. If you're not an expert in accounting, it's worth every penny to hire experts to manage your books for you and help you interpret them and use those numbers as a strategic planning tool. So, Martin, the next after accounting, one of the biggest errors we see with business owners is what we call owner dependency. And that means that the owner oftentimes controls every aspect of the business. They're the key uh, contact for customer relationships. They may be the key source of knowledge in the business. Uh, and if that's the case, ironically, when most business owners sell, they sell because they want to retire or transition out of the company over time. Now, some do want to stay on and they just want to bring on some kind of an investment partner, but the majority are looking for a fairly short runway. And oftentimes buyers are hesitant to buy that kind of a business because they see too much risk with the success of the company tied up in that business owner. So there's a kind of fundamental principle for most businesses, and we see this all the time. And the simple fact is that most business owners spend 95% or more of their time working in their business and 5% of their time or less working on their business. So they're not focused on building out the business to make it sellable. They're focused on running it for income today, tax avoidance, and kind of running some personal family expenses through the business. And there's a big difference between running a company for daily income and distributions versus running a business to enhance its value and make it sellable at the end of the day. And those business owners who don't invest in any kind of management talent who can be trained to succeed them are not focused on value creation at the end of the day. They primarily see it as, well, I'm just going to have to spend a lot more money today. Uh, so that's owner dependency makes some companies unsellable, or buyers create deal structures that are not ideal because they want to mitigate the risk of the dependency on that owner, or they pay a lot less money for it, or they pay the money out over a long period of time. So that's the number two factor that we see in companies. Number three is what's referred to as customer dependency. That means, and the litmus test for that is almost universally. So if we're representing a business owner and buyers are interested and they call me to say, hey, I want to know about this company. Why is the owner selling? How's their accounting? And what percentage of their total business comes from one customer? And if that number is above 20%, for many buyers, and this is private equity buyers, family offices buyers, buyers called independent sponsors, even search fund buyers, uh, they automatically walk away. Can't do it. There's too much risk tied up in one company. Simple story from experience again. I had a client who was a very, very talented marketing guy. He'd won all kinds of creative awards. And he also had what's called a premium as incentive business. He would do campaigns, and they would have, pens and pencils and T-shirts and all those kind of things. And it was just he and his wife primarily. And he had one client who was a very large chain with multiple locations. And he thought he had 20 individual customers because he called on each one of those individual offices. Well, we brought him 6 buyers for the company at a very good valuation total. But because every buyer saw the dependency of his talent on the business, and that he had a top client that at the corporate level represented 50% of his business, no one would pay him cash up front. They wanted him to stay on. They offered him a very good salary, and he had what's called an earnout structure for 2 to 3 years after that, if the company continued to grow and build. And he got very upset, and he turned them all down, walked away from 6 offers that were reasonably to better than reasonable on valuation in total. He didn't like the deal structure, didn't like not getting any cash. Well, sadly, this again, true story, 6 months later, that large client that represented 50% of his business left him. And his business at that point became completely unsellable. And so that's why owner dependency and customer dependency are such critical benchmarks in what buyers look for. Beyond that, similarly, can be vendor dependency. So if your business is solely reliant, for example, on a unique piece of equipment or material or product of some kind that you can't source elsewhere, Buyers are very skeptical of that. And I had a client similarly who it was a fascinating business, highly profitable, great business owner, but he had a manufactured product that it was mandatory, it was required for him in order to provide the service that he provided. And buyers looked at that business and he didn't have a contract with that manufacturer. It was a family-owned business, and he couldn't really source that product anyplace else. Certainly of not equal quality. He might have been able to get it from the Far East. But we couldn't bring buyers to the table for that business because of the dependency that his company was solely reliant on that one manufacturer. So alternative sourcing, that's another key factor. The fifth of those is, and we hear this more and more, especially in, well, pretty much almost any kind of business, is the measurement of what's referred to as gross profit margin. So every industry has, you have revenue, then you have your cost of goods materials, and the net of that before any of your operating expenses and salaries and rents, etc., is gross profit. And they all have a percentage margin. Every industry is different. So the buyers for any kind of company, that's one of the, again, initial questions we get. What's their gross profit margin? So they have a minimum threshold that they're willing to take a risk on. And if they're well above the gross profit margin for an industry, fantastic. If they're below that, it's oftentimes an immediate disqualifier, or they're going to do a deep dive to find out why that's the case. So management of gross margins is really important because that's going to be one of the benchmark factors, and that's along with the broader financial performance of a business. Are they growing in sales? Are they growing in profits? Are they stagnant? Are they in decline? And those are kind of the real critical factors. There are many others, but those are the key. All right, well, Martin, again, thank you so much for having me on your program today. And if I could just leave your listeners with a couple of key ways that they can reach me, we would love to help you. We can offer just some complimentary advice, no cost, no obligations. You can reach me, Cameron Bishop. My email address is cameron.bishop@raincatcher.com. You can hit our website, www.raincatcher.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Be happy to chat with you anyway, and we could set up a time for a call if I can answer questions for you. If you're in a position where you might want to be selling your company, obviously I'd love to have a chance to pitch your business, and we take very good care of our clients. So again, thank you, Martin, and I hope everybody gains some beneficial information today.
21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
Imagine a space where triumphs, trials, and tales of entrepreneurship come alive. Welcome to the 21st Century Entrepreneurship Podcast, a gold awarded journey hosted by Martin Piskarik, connecting with listeners in 95 countries and ranking in the top 0.5% of all podcasts. Join our exclusive community, elevate your perspective, and embark on the path to success.